Welcome, hotshots, to the Firepower X Self-Command portal. Here you can find the industrial strength tools you need to dominate your personal and professional wellness. My name is Jess. I'm boss lady here at Firepower X, former firefighter and host for today's webinar. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest today, Diane Schroeder. Diane is a national speaker, a writer, and a podcast host for The Fire Inside of Her. And she focuses on helping leaders understand and appreciate the value of self-care, drawing from a 24-year career in the fire service. Leading, might I add, leading in the fire service. Very important point. So welcome, Diane. We're so glad to have you here today with us.
Jess, thank you so much. I'm very excited to sit down and chat with you about my favorite topics.
Me too. Because you were, we had you at the conference. Everyone loved your talk. And, you are no stranger to the stage. This is something leadership, culture, self-care. I'm just so excited to dive into these topics with you. And I'm curious, and you and I have kind of chatted about this off stage, that the fire service keeps kind of pulling you back now that you're officially retired, right? Why do you think that is? Why do you think it keeps kind of calling you, Diane? Come back to us.
That is a really good question, and I have no idea. I, I would like to think it's part of my DNA. It's part of who I am. I was a third generation firefighter. My grandfather joined the fire service back in New York after he got home from World War II. My dad fell in love with the fire service in the late 60s. And so part of it is just a calling that I've had my entire life. And I think now that I'm slightly removed, it's much easier to work with the fire service right now at the point I am in my life than it was trying to work with the fire service and work for the fire service.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is very true. And what aspects of yourself and your personality do you think the fire service kind of called out in you? Like what is it that draws people in, and what elements of yourself were kind of drawn in to being a firefighter? I'm just curious.
Oh, well, another really good question. I think, at the core, the foundation of the fire service, it's service to the community. It's helping people. It's when people have exceeded their problem, the ability to solve the problem on their own, they call 911. And so it's a very enticing to be able to help people and serve. And it's a huge adrenaline rush initially. There is nothing like riding on a fire engine. There's nothing like, you know, going to an emergency scene and bringing the calm to the chaos. And so I think there's definitely, it's very enticing. And it was what I thought I had as one of my few options. I was going to go to college and be a nurse. And then my grandmother became very ill with dementia, and I couldn't leave her because she was a primary caregiver in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
so I stayed, and I was like, I can be a firefighter. And my dad was like, you need to lay down until that feeling goes away. So I was like, well, I don't know. And plus, it was really fun hanging out with all the young 20 somethings at the firehouse, and this kind of camaraderie and fellowship and, family of just the joking around and the sarcasm. It was very natural.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I found that same thing. It just kind of, it was like a siren's call to me almost. I was doing other things and it just, again, beckoned me back. So,
Yes. And I think the other piece for me, if I'm being completely honest, is, I experienced quite a bit of trauma as a child, a lot of childhood trauma. And the idea that I could potentially help people when I didn't always have people there to help me was also a very enticing invitation.
the wounded healer archetype. Do you think maybe
Oh,
it got
yeah.
activated?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Well, let's
I
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I didn't know that at the time, though. I couldn't have articulated that at 18 years old when I was, just trying to get hired on the fire department. It
Hmm.
wasn't until several years into my career that I was like, oh, there's more going on than all the other reasons.
Hmm. Now you weren't in Colorado at that time when you first started, right? Which remind me which state you were in when you were 18 and just had entered the fire.
No, I was in Colorado. I'm
Oh,
born
you
and
were?
raised Colorado native. Yep, I grew up. I only live about 30 miles from where I grew up. So
Okay.
I, yep, yep. I tested strictly here in Colorado. I wasn't going to go anywhere else. And I got hired in Aurora,
Hmm.
right. I tested right after my 21st birthday and I got hired 2 years later.
Hmm. I'm sorry, excuse my ignorance there. I I thought I had heard you mention another state, one of our other conversations. But
No, that's okay.
I might have been projecting. So that's interesting then. I'm curious too about, leadership has definitely been a theme for you in, not only your background, right? You're an EFO, you have a master's in organizational leadership. So how did you find it easier or harder to lead as you kind of went up the ranks?
I would say that my entire life I've been a natural leader. It was either being, student body president, captain of the basketball team and softball team.
Mhm.
And for a long time, I was also told I was very bossy, which, that's a completely different conversation because I don't think that my male counterparts were told that they were bossy. They were told they were good leaders. But I also that afforded me a lot of opportunities to understand leadership at a very young age and to have training opportunities and how to set goals at a young age. And then, transitioning that into the fire service, it was it was a little bit of a learning curve, but what helped the most early on in my career was becoming a paramedic. And the reason why is I was able to lead a scene. I had to coordinate, people and tell them what to do, and it really kind of helped get my feet underneath me about leadership. And
Mhm.
then when I started to fill in for an acting officer and ride in that front seat, I had to grow up pretty quick.
Mhm.
And the joke, then I became a lieutenant. I was still 28 years old. So looking back, I feel like I was still pretty young. And I had to really dig deep and figure out who I was pretty early on in my career because that the leading from being someone that I was not wasn't gonna work. The guys were gonna see right through it. And what I mean by that, when I first got hired, I just wanted to be accepted. It was really important for me to be accepted by the crew, to be liked, to fit
Mhm.
in. And if the guys told a dirty joke, I would tell one 10,000 times dirtier. Or, if things were said that made me uncomfortable and bothered me, I didn't say it out loud. I didn't question it because I wanted to be, liked. What I realized when I got promoted to the first line of leadership was that, man, that's a lot of work to be someone you're not. And it also sends a lot of conflicting messages to the people I was responsible for. So I had to just embrace who I was and start using my voice and finding my authentic self to becoming a leader so that I could create the type of atmosphere that drew people who wanted to work with me in.
Mhm.
And then it was really fun. The first line, lieutenant was great, captain was a
Mhm.
lot of fun. And as I got higher up, it became a little less fun, a little more political,
Yeah.
and challenging in different ways.
How? Now keep unpacking that challenging in different ways. I can't stop there.
Well, spoiler. Well, I think, part of the challenges became that, the fire service only has 4% women to begin with. That number has not changed in the last 25 years. Now, hopefully the number moves a little bit, but even if it gets to 10%, there's still not a lot of female firefighters. And that number continues to get smaller the higher up in the organization that you go. So once you're in the rank of battalion chief, division chief, deputy chief, fire chief, there
Mhm.
are fewer women. And I think that spotlight gets put on you, whether it's you do it yourself or it's, perceived or real, that more people are watching. And we have this, the fire service, I think sometimes has a scarcity mindset that, oh man, we can only have one female at the table. We can only have, fill in so many slots. And if there's too many women, or if, I would speak up too loudly, then there was a subtle shift in the energy in the room. And it was like going straight back to being the bossy Betty in high school. And, it just felt more challenging to, it wasn't the battle that I wanted to fight. I wanted to make the organization better. I wanted to, look out for my people and serve the community, not necessarily argue the finer points of whether I'm right or they're wrong, or defend myself because I wasn't like everyone else.
Mhm.
I don't know
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
that makes total sense. Because like, let's be honest, I think we'd all like to think that, men and women would be held to the same standards in the fire service, but they're not. They're not yet, I don't think. We're trying to get there. And so
Hmm.
that, I think that's a perfect example of that, of, it's just like that piece does come into play, unfortunately, because I found that myself, of just even being given advice where I was like, would you say that to my male counterpart? Like,
Yes.
yeah. So even in
It,
academy, they told me, one of the officers in academy pulled me aside and said, just keep your legs closed if you want to be respected. And I was shocked. That just like, I will never forget that. And I just was like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, why is that even a thing, right now? And so things like that, it's just it's subtle, and it does, sorry, I'm kind of going off here in my own memories. But yeah, like how as a woman can we be authentic in the fire service, and how can we lead? Like, this is a really complex topic that I would love to keep unpacking with you here. What did you find, and how did you balance those things of, yeah, being your authentic self, leading, being female, like how how did you do it? Diane? Yes.
well, another really good question, or lots of questions. So let me back up a little bit. I loved working with my guys. In fact, I would often tell you that I felt more comfortable working with the guys than I did with the women. And the reason why, I think, is some of the gals, there was this very competition over collaboration mentality. And so the senior women, when I got hired a long time ago, were more of the, it was kind of rough for me, so it needs to be rough for you. And when you get to a certain point, then we can be friends, or then I can reach out to you. And I don't know if that was intentional or unintentional. So I didn't really pay attention to the male female dynamics. I didn't have to for a really long time. In fact, it wasn't until, I would say, when I started acting in the role of battalion chief, when I became a captain, and it felt different, and it was a subtle difference. It's that the subtle things that I either didn't pay attention to or just ignored kind of started to pop up. Now, at the same time, my personal life was also kind of a mess, so it's hard to say, if I wasn't being my best self because I had a lot of things going on. But it was, I had to push that off to the side. And then when I became a battalion chief, I was in a new organization, and I had a different opportunity. I could take what I'd learned for almost 20 years and apply that to a fresh canvas, so to speak. And really, I focused on leading. I focused on, doing what was best for the organization. I tried to really ignore the politics side of it and any of the subtle, or really not so subtle, acts of exclusion that I would face from certain individuals, and just focus on making my people better, and making the community better and the organization better. And really, I guess, putting the blinders on and not being, afraid of the consequences of being a disruptor, and asking the hard questions. And
Mhm.
really, so much self work went into that, doing the work on understanding what other people think of me is really none of my business. And just, creating an incredible support system outside of the fire service and leaning on mentors and making connections with people that, I could call if I struggled so that I could really just focus on doing what was best at work. And whether that was projects or, like I said, you know, leading my people, connecting with them, and really having to be vulnerable and just courageous. And, it's funny because confidence comes last. You have to take action. You have to take courageous action. You have to be vulnerable. And then I think confidence comes over time. And yet we want the confidence first and then, to give us the courage to do all these things. But for me, I really found that I just had to take consistent action and small steps and screw up and
Mhm.
realize that life goes on after bad things happen, after you screw up, after, life happens, and continue moving forward. Another story that I will tell you is my personal and professional life kind of imploded at the same time. And for
Mhm.
so many years, I worked hard on having a good reputation, a reputation that people respected me for at work. And then when life got messy, no one hesitated to jump on the, you know, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And all that hard work was gone. And what I realized is, like I said, just, you know, what other people think of me is none of my business because I had to know my truth and own my truth and not put that in someone else's hands.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great lesson. Yeah. For anyone, whether they're, a line firefighter, an officer, or a chief, the one that, because yeah, other people's opinions of you aren't your business. And that is a battle, I think, sometimes that we try to fight with reputation of towing the line, doing what
Mhm.
we're told, being this, yeah, this kind of avatar, that's forward facing avatar. But yeah, then ultimately, is it worth it? Is it worth it not to be your authentic self? And then how easily the avatar can be taken down just by simple
Yeah.
simple. And so
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
w sorry, when you give away your power to other people, and then your worth and your value and your identity become, you know, you give that to someone else, of you can't control the outcome, not that you can control the outcome anyway, but at least when you have your own, sense of self and you can follow your own values and your own integrity, then people can rock it, people can say what they want, and it's still yours and you're not giving that power away.
Yes, exactly. That's beautifully put. I would say that too. That there's so much power in authenticity and yeah, adhering to your own values because that can't be shaken. Like when everything else crumbles, maybe reputation,
Mhm.
relationships, or at least like the values are really your foundation.
Mhm.
So yeah, I was going to ask you, what advice would you give to someone who is a natural leader who might not be in an officer position yet, who is kind of feeling a little bit like they have to manage up and they're frustrated with the bureaucracy and how the SOPs and this is how we do it and this is how we always do it. What would you tell to that person, who maybe is a new firefighter and just starting out and feeling that kind of like, oh,
I would say that regardless of what position that you are in, whether it's a formal rank or an informal rank, you can lead where you sit. You can lead in whatever position that is, and that your sphere of influence has a ripple effect. And you can work on controlling what you can control, which is your attitude and how you respond to situations. If you want to make changes, then make changes, take action, be courageous. Don't sit back and complain. If you have solutions to problems, then offer those solutions. If it's outside of the box or if it's not how it's always been done, even better. That's what we need. What I would say though is don't just sit and become, bitter and negative and, absorb the information you can and just, continue to be curious over judgmental. And when it comes to wanting to step into a leadership role, take the leap, take the step. It's not perfect. You're going to mess up, and that's okay. But if you're feeling called to lead people, then you should absolutely do it because the world needs more leaders. The world needs good leaders, leaders that want to lead.
Mhm. That's great. I was letting that soak in for my 16-year-old self. It was just I was listening from the past. Like, yes,
Mhm.
it's just
Mhm.
good life advice, good mom advice. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if my son would agree right now, but thank you. I'm going to tell him that someone else thought I knew what I was talking about.
Speaking of kind of, yeah, leadership and where the fire service is headed and the need for kind of some cultural changes in the fire service. You're still speaking on the circuits and kind of, now that you've kind of are more on the periphery, what are you seeing? Like, what's your prediction of where things are going with fire service culture? Like, with this kind of identity crisis I've heard you mention of that, that the fire service is experiencing right now. Where do you think all this is headed? Where do you see it going?
I think that there's really positive changes, not necessarily because there's negative things happening. It's change in general. And if there's two things firefighters hate, it's change and the way things are. But a good friend of mine, one time she told me, she goes, it's really not the change that's scary. It's the transition. It's that gap, the messy middle of, what is this transition going to look like? And I think as we see a lot of older leaders in the fire service who are retiring and this newer generation, I'd like to say my generation of leaders of, so baby boomer leaders are going out, Gen X leaders are coming in, and some millennial leaders are coming in. And it's just a different style. It's not good or bad or better or worse. It's different, which creates the change. And
Mhm.
I think, with so many generations now working and these younger generations, especially Gen Z of money, once they have enough money to satisfy their needs, they want to know that they're making a bigger impact in the world. And it's really important to remember that as we're looking for, a workforce that's sustainable and people that want to get into the profession of meeting those needs while still serving the community. And the traditions that, we hold on to so tightly in the fire service might be holding us back. And I think the new generations of, this new generation of leadership and kind of the changing of the guard is more open to that and needs to be more adaptable to see where the fire service is going to go.
Mhm. Yeah. What in these kind of this generation of leaders that's kind of up and coming, what kind of traits are you seeing that they're bringing? What kind of fresh energy are they kind of bringing to firefighting?
I think more humility, more, more of that authenticity of, this new generation has been raised in a very, social media, the internet, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina. They have watched in real time natural disasters. Well they are much more trauma informed than we were.
Mhm.
They understand and talk freely about mental health. They have their priorities in a different, different order than maybe some of the older generations do. I think the younger generation has healthier boundaries of what's acceptable and not acceptable. The struggle with that is, when you hear boundaries, when I hear someone set a boundary, someone may say they're whining or complaining. So I think it's going to be a delicate balance of transferring all of this knowledge and tradition of the fire service and what makes this so great, along with continuing to hold the public's perception and trust of us while we change, change guard, change leadership, and try to attract a different workforce, because it's, the job has changed. Fires in itself are such a small percentage of what we do. It's finding humans that want to get in a profession to do EMS, that are, looking towards the other side of preventing accidents and injuries and fires from happening, leaning more on that lens versus being reactive.